Chapter 32 Repairing the House, 5. Seeing this, Zhou could only respond. Then I'll have to trouble you. Later, I will invite you and Uncle to eat dumplings at our new home. Mrs. Wang paused and said, if there's a chance, I'll definitely try your cooking. However, for now, you should start getting your life in order as soon as possible. I definitely will. By the way, I heard that Qingrui has medical skills. Who did he learn from? Zhou paused for a moment before smiling and nodding. He sure knew a little, but I heard that he only learned a little from the doctors in the academy. He can cure some common minor diseases but is not sure about the rest. That's already good enough. At least you two can have a stable income with this skill. Mrs. Wang said happily. Her smile was much more sincere than it was at the beginning. When Zhou saw this, she understood why they were here. However, she also understood that people were creatures of profit. As long as there was something to gain, there would only be opportunities to interact. As for how things would develop in the end, it would depend on the sincerity of both sides. Then, she learned about their family situation. The patriarch and his wife had 3 children. The eldest one was a girl. She had married a scholar from a low-income family in her early years, and now their family was working as government officials in other places. He had 2 sons. The older one, Gu Qinzhen, had just gotten married 2 years ago. The woman was Fang Fang, a daughter of a landlord. They already had a son. The younger Gu Qingxi had been studying outside the family. He had been striving to be a scholar since middle school last year, but unfortunately, his path to the imperial examination had been cut off when the Gu family was in trouble. He was now helping to teach at the family school. After they unloaded the car, Gu Qinzhen looked at Gu Qingrui curiously and asked, I didn't expect you to be so cheerful after the separation. One must always look forward. Some things should be put down, and some responsibilities should be taken up. After Gu Qingrui finished speaking with a smile, he turned his head and glanced at Zhou. It's good that you can get over it, but I have to say that you're pretty lucky. Your wife is not only beautiful, but also capable and kind. In the future, live your life well. Gu Qinzhen laughed and replied after hearing that. Indeed, fortune and misfortune come together, but no one can say for sure. Gu Qingrui nodded in agreement. Gu Qingxi snorted coldly and turned to leave. Seeing this, Gu Qinzhen laughed and said, this kid has a one-track mind. Don't mind him. Let's go. Let's cut out the wood together and try to repair this house as soon as possible. Thank you, Brother Qinzhen. After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he helped the carpenter cut the wood. At night, after everyone had left, Gu Qingrui and Zhou did a simple sweep of the yard. Just as the two finished their work, Tian Zhuang pushed in half a cart of cabbage and said, you two are still busy. These are some cabbages that their owner doesn't want. I thought you guys would have no vegetables to eat, so I brought them over. Please don't mind them. How could we mind? You've solved our pressing problem. Come in and sit for a while. Zhou said. No, I still have to go home for dinner. Let's meet up again after you guys have finished repairing the house. After Tian Zhuang finished speaking, he slowly lifted the cart. Gu Qingrui quickly went forward to help push all the cabbages down and sent Tian Zhuang out. On the other hand, Zhou looked at the vegetables on the ground. They were all small vegetables and mostly leaves. No wonder the owner didn't want them. However, she could still prepare a lot from these vegetables, saving her the trouble of shamelessly picking vegetables planted by the village chief. Then, the two took out their kitchen knives and cleaned up all the vegetables. They then put them in the kitchen, the only room covered with a roof. After that, she cooked a pot of millet porridge, heated the remaining flatbread and dishes from lunch, and had a simple meal. Chapter 33 Completion. Babe, Gu Qingrui asked after the meal, are we using the heated brick bed or building a floor heater? Floor heating. Yes, it's the floor heating. It's too troublesome to build a wall heater, so we can build it to go underground. Shouing hesitated for a moment. Well, do whatever's convenient. We won't be staying in this house for long anyway. Alright, then I'll see to it. Gu Qingrui nodded. After that, the two of them chatted for a while, then closed the door and entered her interspace. After they finished working, they took a shower and slept. This time, Shouing slept until dawn. She only woke up when Gu Qingrui had prepared breakfast. Then, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. It seemed that in the future, it would be better not to live in the temple. After the meal, Shouing took advantage of the fact that no one had come yet and went to her interspace to use the noodle press machine to press 30 pounds of noodles. She took 5 pounds of streaky pork, some mustard, and some sweet sauce. She made fried sauce noodles and a side dish of shredded radish for lunch. However, on this day, not only did Mrs. Bai come to help with the cooking, but even Mrs. Wang had rushed over early. At the front, the father and son of the clan had also brought 3 disciples from the Gu clan to help. Even Gu Qingxi came over to help weave mats. When it was almost noon, the village chief and Qian Jiala transported the tiles over. 3 days later, the house was completely renovated. Even the wall was built with some mud bricks bought from the village. That night, Shouing made fried sauce noodles again at everyone's request. At the same time, she braised a pig's head, 10 pig's trotters, mixed them with a pot of cabbage shreds, cooked a pot of 5 spiced peanuts, and bought 10 pounds of wine. After everyone had eaten and drunk their fill, Gu Qingrui gave everyone their wages, and this was considered a complete end to their renovation. Shouing saw that there was still some meat sauce left, so she scooped out 2 bowls and handed them to Mrs. Bai and Mrs. Wang. Aunties, many thanks for your help these past 2 days. This is just a small gift, and I hope you won't reject it. If you give me something else, I might not accept it. But I really wanted more of this sauce after I tried it, so I definitely won't reserve myself. Mrs. Bai took it with a smile. Yes, this sauce is the best I've ever had. You have to teach me how to make it later. Mrs. Wang nodded in agreement. Sure, come over when you're free. I'll teach you how to blow it up step by step. Shouing said. Then it's decided. After you've cleaned up the house, we'll come over and learn how to make this fried sauce. After Mrs. Wang finished speaking, she invited Mrs. Bai to go out with her. After sending them off, Shouing cleaned up the kitchen, added more firewood, and returned to the house. She took a good look at the neat and tidy house. It really looked no different from a new one. It was just that the mat on the roof that was exposed outside looked very ugly. It seemed that she had better cover it. Otherwise, it would be terrifying if insects or mice fell on her while sleeping at night. Also, the construction of the floor heating was cancelled. It would be a pity to hack away the foundation made of 3-in-1 soil and bluestone. Gu Qingrui returned after sending off the clan leader and the rest. He saw her staring at the roof and immediately thought of something. Don't worry. I scattered a lot of chemical powder on the beam. I guarantee there won't be any snakes, rats, insects, or ants. Then we'll just leave it exposed like this. It's like this over here. Let's not do anything special. At most, we can put a mosquito net on a branch or make a cover. That's fine. By the way, when will the furniture be delivered? It's in 5 days, but should we buy the blanket or take it from the space? I'll buy it. I still have some silver. We can buy a small portion tomorrow to avoid being caught. That's right. Let's buy 2 more sets of cotton-padded clothes and some food. After that, they cleaned the house carefully again and entered the interspace when night fell. Chapter 34. Probing. The following day, after a simple meal, they went to the patriarch's house to borrow an ox cart and went straight to town. They met the Huang mother and daughter on the way, who was going to town to deliver embroidery work. The two of them had initially wanted to just ignore them. However, when Mrs. Huang saw them, she greeted them warmly. "Qingrui, are you two going to the town to buy stuff?" Gu Qingrui had no choice but to reply to them. "That's right. Aunt Huang, you are. You all know the situation at home. I am going to town to get some embroidery work to supplement the family's income." Mrs. Huang replied with an aggrieved expression. Gu Qingrui did not agree with what she said and complained about the Gu family together. Instead, he said, "That's good. Since we're going the same way, let's go together." After that, the ox cart slowly came to a stop. "Then we don't mind if we do." Mrs. Huang immediately responded and pulled her daughter, Gu Ziqiang, onto the ox cart. After sitting down, Mrs. Huang looked at Zhou and asked, "Ying, I heard that you two made a lot of money by digging up medicinal herbs. Is that true? Who did you hear this from? If we're wealthy, wouldn't we be able to buy a house in town?" Zhou asked in surprise. "But I heard you guys spent a lot of money building your house," Gu Ziqiang said. "Not really. It's all thanks to the help of the clan leader and the village chief. Otherwise, we wouldn't have enough money to eat after the house is repaired." Zhou shook her head with a worried look. Gu Ziqiang wanted to ask more, but Mrs. Huang pulled on her sleeve and interrupted her. She knew they wouldn't be able to get anything out of her, so she changed the subject and asked, "What are you going to buy in town? Do you need our help? The weather has been getting colder recently, so I thought of buying a bed and 2 sets of cotton-padded clothes to get through winter. We would only buy the rest slowly." "That's true. Frost falls every morning now. I really can't do without cotton-padded clothes." After Mrs. Huang finished speaking, she glanced at the clothes on Zhou Ying's body and then remembered that the family had not given them anything to spend the winter with. Therefore, they didn't probe further and started to chat. However, Zhou Ying just grunted and laughed in response. She didn't give a reply, nor did she express her opinion. But she listened with great interest to the stories of the two women about their wits and courage in trying to get the housework done. When they arrived in town, Mrs. Huang got out of the cart and said, "The embroidery workshop I am going to sells cotton and cloth. Do you want to go and take a look?" "No, Aunt Huang. We have to take a look at buying a water tank and other big items first. We'll consider the rest when we come back," Gu Qingrui said. "All right then, we'll head over first." Mrs. Huang turned around and left after she finished speaking. After they parted ways, the young couple went to buy 1 big and 2 small tubs, followed by 10 pounds of millet and 50 pounds of black flour. When they passed by the market, Zhou Ying went around to see what kinds of vegetables were available in the current season. She didn't expect that there were only radishes, cabbages, and winter melons available. Furthermore, the winter melons were quite expensive. They cost 2 coppers per pound. It seemed that the gift from the clan leader was worth quite a bit. The most popular goods sold were eggs and all kinds of dried vegetables. There was also a place that sold pickled vegetables. Zhou Ying saw that the stall's business was quite good, so she spent 10 coppers on buying a pound of pickled cucumbers. After that, she met up with Gu Qingrui. Finally, the two of them went to the cloth shop. They didn't expect to see the Huang mother and daughter still waiting inside. Seeing them looking over, Zhou Ying stepped forward and asked, "Aunt Huang, Ziqiang, you haven't handed over your work yet?" "Not yet. The manager is currently serving 2 important clients, so we can only wait for them to finish," Mrs. Huang said as she pointed to a place not far away. Chapter 35. A reminder. Zhou Ying looked in the direction she was pointing at. Sure enough, the female shopkeeper was serving a woman in her 40s who looked very strict. Two employees were serving a well-dressed mother and daughter. It just so happened that she didn't want to have too much contact with the Huang mother and daughter, so she simply took the opportunity to say, "Aunt Huang, it seems that they won't be able to finish in a short time. You wait here then. I'll go to the other shop to take a look." "Don't. There are only 2 cloth shops in town. The Chiao family owns the other one. If they recognize you, they'll definitely humiliate you." Mrs. Huang quickly stopped her and whispered. "The Chiao family." "Yes, the Chiao family. I heard that the shop they are using now used to belong to the Gu family's shop. Thank you for your reminder, Aunt Huang. Please wait here for a while. Well, go and shop around." "That's fine, but don't take too long. They should be almost done." "All right," she said, and she turned around. She walked toward Gu Qingrui, who was guarding the ox cart, and said, "Husband, it's busy inside. Do you have anything else to buy? Well, come back later." Gu Qingrui lifted his head and tugged at her slightly slanted top. "We don't have much money left, so let's buy a quilt and cotton-padded clothes first." "You're right." Zhou Ying responded, sat on the ox cart, and talked to him about their following plans. After all, it was not a long-term plan to go into the mountains to dig herbs. In the end, the two of them discussed and decided to go into the mountains 2 more times. After winter, Gu Qingrui would officially start practicing medicine, while Zhou Ying would sell bean sprouts at home. In a short while, the shopkeeper sent the old woman off. After sending the mother and daughter off, Zhou Ying got out of the cart and walked in. The waiter immediately approached her and asked, "Mrs., what do you want to buy? Do you have ready-made quilts and cotton-padded clothes here?" "Yes, but because of the size difference, it has to be custom-made. It's scheduled for half a month now." "What do you think, Zhou Ying? In my opinion, you'd better buy cotton and cloth and go home to make it yourself. Otherwise, you'll have to wait." Mrs. Huang, who was handing over the work, said at this time. However, after she finished speaking, she remembered that Zhou Ying had grown up in the kitchen. Although she was stellar in terms of cooking, she shouldn't be proficient in needlework. So, Mrs. Huang immediately shut her mouth. The employee didn't try to persuade her again but waited for Zhou Ying's decision. Zhou Ying hesitated momentarily and asked, "Then how much is cotton?" "Red cotton is 50 copper a pound, and high-quality white cotton is 80 copper a pound." Zhou Ying was shocked. She didn't expect cotton to be so expensive. She would be rich if she planted cotton in her interspace for just a season. Then she asked, "The red cotton you're talking about is the kind that's dug out from a cotton peach?" "It's about the same, but it's not as warm and fluffy." Zhou Ying hesitated for a moment before asking again, "How much for a whole piece of cotton cloth?" "A 23-foot-long white cloth is 350 copper per batch, and the one with the plaid pattern is 400 copper." "What about sackcloth?" 300 copper per batch." "Then give me 15 pounds of white cotton, a roll of coarse white cloth, and a roll of coarse cloth with checkered patterns." "Please wait a moment." After the young man finished speaking, he turned around and walked to the back. "Zhou Ying, if you want to make 2 quilts and 2 cotton-padded clothes, I'm afraid 15 pounds of cotton is not enough." Mrs. Huang reminded her at this time. "There is a heated brick bed at home, coupling this with our old clothes should be enough. If it's not enough, we can add more later." When Mrs. Huang heard this, she only thought that Zhou Ying didn't have enough money and didn't say anything more. The shop assistant quickly brought out the 2 rolls of cloth he had prepared. Then, he took out a sack of cotton and weighted it in front of her. "White cotton is 80 copper per pound. 15 pounds is 1,200 copper. In addition to the 400 copper and 350 copper worth of cloth, the total is 1,950 copper. Chapter 36 Penniless. Wait a moment. After Zhou said that, she took out her money pouch. Counting the exact amount, she looked at the only 2 copper coins left in her hand and secretly broke into a sweat. Fortunately, she had listened to Gu Shengruo's words and did not buy anything else. Otherwise, she would have made a fool of herself today. In the end, she simply gave the extra 2 coppers to the little shop assistant and asked him to give 2 medium-sized needles for the quilt. When she was done buying here, Mrs. Huang was almost done too. Finally, the mother and daughter each helped her carry a piece of cloth out while she took the sack of cotton. After putting the things in the cart, Gu Qingrui looked at the Huang mother and daughter and asked, "Aunt Huang, do you want to go back together or? You guys go on ahead. We have to buy something else." Mrs. Huang waved her hand and said. They were ordered to buy meat today, so it was inconvenient to be with them. All right, then we'll take our leave first. Gu Qingrui didn't think much about it. After speaking, he drove the ox cart back with Zhou. After returning home, Zhou put the cloth and cotton into the house and then moved the rest of the stuff to the kitchen with Gu Qingrui. Then, she took out the 3 water tubs, only using the largest one to store water. She planned to store food in the remaining 2 small tubs, otherwise, their food would easily attract rats. After she was done, Zhou turned her head and said, "By the way, Rui, I have to tell you that we are penniless again." "I got it, so we have to go into the mountains 2 more times. At least it will ensure that we have food and clothing this winter. You can go make the quilt. I have to return the ox cart." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he drove the ox cart and left. Zhou returned to the main room and looked at the cloth and scattered cotton on the bed. It seemed that she could only take the ready-made vest from her interspace. After making up her mind, she took a pair of scissors and a ruler from her interspace and began cutting the quilt and mattress covers. Just as she started, she heard Mrs. Wang shouting from outside. "Qingrui, are you home?" "Yes, Auntie, please come in." After Zhou finished speaking, she looked at the empty bed. She quickly took out the old quilt and threw it at the head of the bed. Just then, Mrs. Wang came in with a pile of woven goods. There was a broom, a curtain, a woven pot cover, a wooden steamer, a bamboo dustpan, a basket, and a few steamed buns. "These are some things that your uncle personally made. Although they look ordinary, they are quite durable. You guys can use them first." "Thank you so much. These things are what we need the most at the moment." Zhou quickly stepped forward to take it and put it aside. That's why people say that a new house is worth thousands. There are a lot of things that need to be added after moving. If you need anything, just let me know. Auntie, you are the best. If there's anything I really need help with, I'll let you know. That's right. You can't do everything on your own. When Mrs. Wang said this, she saw many things on the bed and asked, "Oh, you're planning to make a new quilt?" "Yeah, otherwise it'll get cold." After Zhou finished speaking, she invited her to sit on the bed. Mrs. Wang shook her head. "It's fine. I'm going to harvest the cabbages at home. Qingrui said that you want to keep them for the winter. I wonder how many you plan to take. How many are there available in your house?" "Don't worry. I've planted more than 20 acres of land. It's definitely enough for your family. Then it'll take 300 pounds. I'll also buy some radishes, dried vegetables, and the like to go with it." Zhou continued, "But I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more days for this money." Chapter 37 Going up the mountain again. You're being too polite. Just give it whenever you have it. Mrs. Wang waved her hand. "By the way, Qingrui has driven the ox cart to the field to help with the cabbage harvesting, she said. He won't be back for lunch and dinner. You should come over later so you don't have to cook alone. Thank you for the offer, but I can't. I have to make the quilt as soon as possible. Otherwise, I won't be able to use it in time. Zhou hesitated for a moment but still refused. That's true. Then, I'll leave you to your work. After Mrs. Wang finished speaking, she turned around and walked out. After Zhou sent her away, she immediately closed the door and returned to the house to get busy. After cutting the cloth, she took it to her interspace and used the sewing machine to make 2 5-foot 7-inch quilts and 2 bedding covers. After it was done, she washed it in the washing machine, soaked it in an odorless softener for 15 minutes, and finally dried it on the side. Then, she went to the warehouse and found 2 cotton quilt covers that weighed 5 pounds each and were 5 foot 7-inch long, a mattress cover, and cut it into 2. Finally, she found 2 silk cotton quilts 6 foot 7-inch long and stacked them together. She planned to use them as a cover for the brick bed. After she prepped all of them, she hung them to dry on the villa's roof in the interspace. As for the pillows, they had 2 already made from sorghum stalk. She just made 2 pillow covers with the coarse cloth. After she was done, she immediately left the interspace. Seeing it was getting late, she immediately took out a bag of frozen dumplings with a vegetarian filling from her interspace and cooked them. After resting for a while, she began to make cotton-padded clothes, but she couldn't make it to work no matter what. She had to find 2 sets of fitting clothes in her interspace and try to patch them to look like she had made them. However, even after Gu Qingrui returned at night with the cabbage, she only made her cotton-padded jacket. Fortunately, they had a bed for the night, and the 2 of them were finally considered to have completely settled down. Over the next 2 days, Gu Qingrui went to the patriarch's house to help with the collection of cabbages, while Zhou continued to make the 2 sets of cotton-padded clothes. At the same time, she also made 2 sheepskin waistcoats by hand, chopped the various kinds of wood left over when the roof was repaired into firewood and piled them under the wall. The village chief's family also took the opportunity to collect all the cabbages in their backyard. When everything was ready, the 2 of them went up the mountain for 5 days in a row. While digging for medicinal herbs, they also collected more firewood. Suddenly, the pile of firewood in their house was almost enough for them to burn through the winter. Of course, they had also collected a lot of medicinal herbs, but nothing was precious. Thus, they could only dig out 2 50-year-old Chinese knotweeds from the interspace. At the same time, they called back the dog that they had fed previously. After Gu Qingrui checked and cleaned it, it was officially a pet at their home. After breakfast, Gu Qingrui asked, "Babe, you're really not going to town? Aren't you with Mr. Tian? I won't go over to join in the fun. Remember to buy 5 pounds of green beans, 5 pounds of soybeans, and 2 small water tubs when you come back." "All right then. Then you should rest at home for half a day. Don't go up the mountain again." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he took the 2 bags of medicinal herbs and walked out. Seeing this, Zhou picked up the small bag containing the Chinese knotweed and followed. After sending the 2 off, she was about to turn around and go home. Suddenly, someone behind her said, "You're the Gu family's wife, right?" This sudden question startled Zhou. When she turned her head, she saw a woman with a tired face. She was looking at her with a smile worse than someone crying. "Yes, I'm Zhou. Are you Mr. Tian's sister?" She laughed dryly. "Yeah, you've moved in for a few days, but we haven't had a chance to talk. Come and visit when you're free." Sister Tian nodded. Chapter 38 Treating Guest, I Will. When Zhou said this, she looked at the basin of clothes in her hand and asked, "Sister Tian, did you just wash your clothes?" Yes, there are 2 children at home. Their clothes are getting dirty very quickly. As she walked in, she asked, "Do you want to come in for a seat? Maybe another day. We've been going up the mountain for a few days, so I have to clean up the house and wash my clothes." "Sure, come over when you're free." After she finished speaking, Sister Tian walked straight home. Zhou also returned home. First, she tidied up the house inside and out. Finally, she threw the clothes she had changed out into the washing machine in her interspace. However, she didn't dry it inside her interspace this time. Instead, after washing it, she wrung it with her hands and hung it on the rope outside her house. As soon as the clothes were hung up, the carpenter, Tian Jiaxing, came in with a cart of furniture. Zhou immediately greeted him, "Uncle Jiaxing, you have done it this quickly? I knew you were in a hurry, so I made a bedside table and a stool as quickly as possible. However, you will have to wait a few more days for the dining table, chairs, and desk." After Tian Jiaxing finished speaking, he pushed the cart to the door and began to unload it. Zhou immediately came forward to unload the things and asked, "How many more days will it take?" "No matter what, it'll take about 10 days. "I understand. Then shall I pay you the wages in one go after that?" "No problem. I'll leave you to your work then." After Tian Jiaxing finished speaking, he pulled onto his cart and left the house in a hurry. Zhou took all the furniture into the house and wiped it clean. After that, she transformed the original torn quilt into a cotton curtain for the living room. When she was done, it was almost noon. She took a pound of prawns from her interspace and made a pot of fried prawns. Then, she made a serving of cabbage in vinegar sauce and heated 10 beef buns. When she was almost done, Gu Qingrui pushed his cart in, followed by Tian Jiawang. Zhou was stunned for a moment. She immediately put the pot of fried shrimp into her interspace. Of course, it wasn't that she didn't want to let him eat it, but she had never seen anyone in town sell such large prawns before. It would be hard to explain. "Hubby, Mr. Tian, you're back." After greeting them, she looked at the cart full of things and asked, "Why did you buy so many?" "Not much. Besides what you asked me to buy, I just bought some commonly used herbs." After Gu Qingrui said this, he handed one of the jars to her and said, "I bought a few fish on my way back. Cook 2 of them as you see fit. I want to have a drink or 2 with Brother Tian later." "No problem. Then you guys go in, drink some water, and rest for a while. The food will be ready soon." After Zhou finished speaking, she welcomed Tian Jiawang and carried the water tub into the house. Gu Qingrui immediately brought in the other tubs and the beans and welcomed Tian Jiawang into their living room. Zhou looked at the fish and found that there was a bass, so she steamed one. Then, she picked up a giant carp and braised it. After that, she felt it was a little shabby with only 3 dishes, so she fried a plate of peanuts and made a dumpling soup. After it was done, she brought the food to the living room. However, she didn't stay. Instead, she cleaned up and went back to the kitchen. She ate a serving of prawns with a bottle of Coke. In the living room, Gu Qingrui invited Tian Jiawang to eat and drink while thanking him for his help. When the 2 were almost full, Gu Qingrui said, "I'll have to ask Brother Tian for help tomorrow with building the shed." Chapter 39 Modification. Brother Gu, you're being too polite. We're neighbors, so this is a small favor that I should do. Besides, with a doctor like you staying by my side, my heart will feel much more at ease. When Tian Jiawang said this, he immediately thought of his deceased wife and child. His nose twitched, and tears flowed down. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui could guess what had happened. But it would be useless to try to comfort him now, so he could only say, "In the future, if you need my help, just say the word." I will definitely do my best. I'm sorry for showing my ugly side. Tian Jiawang wiped his tears and replied with a dry smile. That's not true. A man doesn't cry easily, but that just means that he hasn't reached a certain point. Besides, I don't think it's embarrassing to cry for your wife and child. Instead, it shows that you value relationships. However, the dead have already passed, and I hope you can look forward. I think that your wife wouldn't want you to be immersed in the past. Tian Jiawang nodded his head and raised his glass to him. After Gu Qingrui drank up, he refilled their glasses and changed the topic. Brother Tian, why don't I teach you how to recognize some medicinal herbs? This way, when you go hunting in the mountains in the future, you can pick some medicinal herbs and sell them to me. It's much more of a stable income than if you just go hunting. Will it be difficult? It won't. Picking herbs isn't studying medicine. Of course, if you want to make a living out of this, there's a lot to learn. Alright, I'll listen to you. Let me know when you go up the mountain again. I will. After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he invited him to eat 2 buns. After the two of them had eaten and drunk their fill, they pushed the cart and sent Tian Jiawang back. He began to pack up the medicinal herbs after he returned. When he was almost done, Zhou finished washing the pots and came in. He immediately got up and asked, Babe, I remember I collected 5 sets of second-hand medicine cabinets in the interspace. Do you still remember? There seems to be a medicine cabinet. Are you planning to take it out directly? Yes, let's take a set first. No one will notice if it's second-hand and not eye-catching. Sure, wait a moment. I have to go look for it. After Zhou finished speaking, she entered the small room on the west side of the house. Then, she flashed into her interspace and searched the warehouse with her mental power for almost a quarter of an hour before she found the medicine cabinet he mentioned. She took it out and immediately placed it in the west room. Gu Qingrui heard noises and walked in. Yes, this is it. 88 drawers in total. It's enough for now. Then let's put it in this room. This will be your consultation room and study room in the future. After Zhou finished speaking, she stuck the medicine cabinet to the west wall. Alright, take some quicklime powder and put it in the room to absorb the water vapor. After Gu Qingrui said that, he began arranging the medicinal herbs according to his habits. At the same time, he told her he had made an appointment with Tian Jiawang to come over tomorrow to help build the woodshed. Babe, do you want to build another chicken coop? No, I don't want to keep chickens at home. They smell terrible in the summer. However, we can rebuild the toilet. The squatting hole of a toilet is so awkwardly positioned. Not only do we have to clean it from time to time, but we can also get water on our bodies if we're not careful. Gu Qingrui paused. He stopped what he was doing and turned his head. Do you still remember the earliest type of public toilet? It's the kind where the pit is inclined downward, and whatever we flush could directly rush into the cesspit. Sure, it's still better than what we have now. Gu Qingrui nodded and got to work. Seeing this, Zhou took out quicklime and stacked it around the base of the wall. Finally, she took out the necessary stationaries and some glue for him. She turned to the kitchen and placed the remaining 2 big fish into a bucket. Chapter 40 Distributing the eggs. Zhou carried the 2 newly bought water tubs into her interspace and used an electric drill to drill a few holes under each of the water tubs. After she was done, she took out 2 pounds of soybeans and green beans and soaked them in the water. She then covered them with a double layer of wet cloth. Once that was done, she moved it out of her space and placed it beside the stove. Finally, she wanted to start a fire on the stove. She carried a basket and a sickle, thinking of cutting some withered grass at the foot of the mountain and using them as a fire starter. Unexpectedly, when she reached the foot of the mountain, she faintly heard a familiar sound of suppressed crying. Zhou was stunned for a moment and looked for the source of the sound. Then, she saw Gu Qingxi sitting behind a stone, holding his head and crying pitifully. Zhou hesitated for a moment, but she still walked over and patted him on the shoulder. Qingxi, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Gu Qingxi stiffened for a moment and turned his head with a smile. Third sister-in-law, it's you. Have you been bullied at home? No, I just, Gu Qingxi stammered. Zhou didn't ask any more questions, but looking at his obviously thin face, she still reminded him, a crying child will get his milk, but you have to find the right person to cry to so that that person knows you've been wronged. Gu Qingxi looked at her in shock. Zhou knocked his head and said, isn't that right? Who would know if you were crying here? You might as well chop some wood to vent the anger inside you. After saying that, she turned around and walked toward the withered grass. Gu Qingxi raised his head and looked at her back thoughtfully. However, as children of a concubine, they were born half-servants. Weren't they the same in the past? So what if it was tough and tiring? No one would feel bad for them. No, he still had his mother. But he quickly shook his head, his mother's life was even more difficult than his. What about his father and matriarch? It appears he needed to find someone to complain to and think of a way. Otherwise, with his small body, he would collapse from exhaustion sooner or later. Zhou didn't know what he was thinking, but she started cutting the grass seriously. However, she found a nest with more than 10 wild eggs before she could harvest enough. She thought of Gu Qingxi's small and thin face. She turned around and waved at him. Qingxi, come here. Gu Qingxi was startled when he heard her calling him, but he still ran over and asked, third sister-in-law, what's wrong? Zhou pointed to the nest of wild eggs and said, since we're both here, well, split these in half. Each person gets 5. You're really giving it to me? Gu Qingxi's eyes lit up. Although he could eat his fill under the protection of his mother, he was really short on protein. There was no share for him of the eggs at home, so he was starving. Moreover, there was still his mother, who was eating worse than him, so he needed these eggs. Of course, why else would I call you over? But whether you can eat it or not depends on your ability. After Zhou finished speaking, she picked out 5 big ones for him. Gu Qingxi calmed down after he took it from her. He was afraid that if he brought it to those people back home, he and his mother would not have a share. Third sister-in-law, can I cook it in your house before bringing it back? She asked Zhou. Sure, come back to get it when you go back tonight. However, if you want to eat by yourselves for the long run, you have to think of a way, such as roasting whatever you get. After Zhou finished speaking, she asked him to put the wild eggs in the basket. Gu Qingxi's eyes brightened even more after hearing this. He nodded excitedly and said, I understand. Okay, but be careful. Also, you have to clean up your trail. After Zhou finished speaking, she continued to cut the withered grass while Gu Qingxi turned around and happily went to gather firewood. Chapter 41 Repaying the Kindness. A moment later, Zhou finished harvesting a basket full of grass and went home. The sky had just turned dark, so she went straight to the kitchen, boiled the eggs, and left them to cool aside. Then, she made dinner. She made millet porridge, steamed black bread, and shredded pork meat stir-fried with wild eggs. When she was almost done with her work, Gu Qingxi quietly walked in and sniffed. Third sister-in-law, your cooking is still the best. Then stay and eat with us before we go back. If there's a chance in the future. I have to head back now, or else there won't be any food for me if I am late. Alright, be careful on your way back. After Zhou finished speaking, she took out 5 wild chicken eggs and handed them to him together with a steamed bun. You've been working hard the whole afternoon. Have this to line your stomach. Thank you, third sister-in-law. I'll take my leave now. Gu Qingshi hesitated for a moment but still took it. Then, he bit into the steamed bun and left the kitchen. After he left, Gu Qingrui walked in and asked, "Did my seventh brother come over just now?" "Yes, I prepared some food for him," Zhou Ying said as she recapped the story of the little guy crying in secret in the afternoon and how she shared the wild chicken eggs with him. Gu Qingrui was stunned for a moment. That's normal. How would a young master used to living like a prince stand the hard and poor life now? If you can help, then do so in the future. But we have to limit the help we provide to prevent getting us in trouble. Yeah, let's eat. Zhou Ying nodded and began to scoop up a bowl of rice. After their meal, the sky was completely dark. Gu Qingrui took out a money bag from the west room and handed it to her. "Babe, this is the remaining money after buying the medicine we needed today. It's a total of 8 taels and 3 coins. I still have 200 coppers here. 100 coppers for the chief's food, and the other 100 coppers for the furniture. Rui, you should keep these 300 coppers as pocket money." After Zhou Ying said that, she returned the money to him. "Thank you, my wife." Gu Qingrui took it with a smile. "By the way, there's no need to rush the money for the furniture. I've already told Uncle Tian that we'll settle the bill in one shot." "That's fine. I'll deliver the money for the food first." "Oh right, I also have to give out some fish. One is for the family patriarch, and the other is for the village chief, to thank them for their help." "That's true. Oh yeah, there are still quite a lot of desserts in the space. Let's give them 2 pounds each." After Zhou Ying finished speaking, she disappeared. When she came out again, she had 2 bags of peach crisps and 2 bags of date cakes in her hands. Gu Qingrui took the bags of dessert and said, "I'll go to the patriarch's house first. Be careful." After saying that, he put the coins into the west room and went out with the snacks and fish. When he arrived at the patriarch's house, the family was eating dinner. When they saw him coming in with some things in his hand, the patriarch immediately stood up and said straightly, "Qingrui, what are you doing? Why did you bring something here?" Mrs. Wang also stood up and agreed. "That's right. It's not easy for you to take them back to nourish your bodies and strive to have a child as soon as possible." After saying that, Gu Qingrui set aside the items in his hand and said, "Although I'm not well off, I can still afford to show my respect to my elders." He took out 100 coppers and said, "Auntie, raise the money for the cabbage." "You are being too calculative," Mrs. Wang said with a smile. "Since I said that we were buying them, of course I would pay. As for the knitted goods that you gave us, I know that it's a welcoming gift. Naturally, I won't hesitate to receive them." "Not bad, you're well-mannered and polite. It seems that your studies weren't in vain all these years." The clan leader nodded in agreement. "Let's sit down and eat together," he offered. Chapter 42 Explanation. "It's fine, Uncle. I've already eaten before coming. You guys should hurry and eat your dinner." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he cupped his hands in a salute and turned to leave. Seeing this, the clan leader accompanied him out of the house and turned to Mrs. Wang, "Keep and remember to store the fish well. Don't let the wild cat get it." "I know. This child sure has changed. If he didn't look exactly the same, I would have thought that he was a different person. I heard that he passed the elementary scholars test last year, which shows that he's not stupid. His strange personality from before must have been from being unable to take the series of blows to his life and having his mind in a dark place. In addition to the bullying from his family, he endured it until he couldn't and naturally had to change. But he didn't become worse, which means he's a determined person. The clan leader concluded. A reverse in personality after reaching an extreme? Gu Qingxi asked thoughtfully. That's right. Rather than saying it was just him, haven't you also been depressed ever since you were stripped of your position? It's a good thing we've always let you have your way, but I'm sure you've heard about the couple's life before. To be honest, I admire him for being able to survive. So, you must get out of your depression as soon as possible. The imperial examination is not the only path in this world. After saying this in a serious tone, the clan leader sat down and continued to eat. On the other hand, Gu Qingrui did not know that the clan leader had made a series of explanations for his change. After he came out, he returned and again took the same gifts to the village chief's house to thank him for their help. The next morning, Tian Jiawang rushed over with a shovel when the two had breakfast when the two were having breakfast. After the two of them finished their meals quickly, Gu Qingrui and Tian Jiawang started to get busy. Zhou quickly went to the town and bought 5 pounds of pork shoulder. She called Sister Tian and her daughter over and used 2 pounds of meat and 5 cabbages to start making dumplings. Everyone had a good meal at noon, and Sister Tian helped out for the rest of the afternoon. It was not until after dark that the woodshed and toilet were completely renovated. Zhou asked them to stay for a big meal. After they were done with a whole day of work, Zhou also found that, in addition to being frugal due to being poor, Sister Tian was quite warm-hearted and did her job quickly and cleanly. Therefore, when she sent her off during the night, she asked, Sister Tian, when will you be free? Can you teach me how to make clothes and shoes? Tomorrow afternoon will do. I'm free every afternoon. Sister Tian said after a moment of hesitation. All right, I'll come to see you tomorrow afternoon. Okay, but I don't have spare cloths at home, so you have to bring them yourself. After saying that, she turned around and brought the 2 children home. Next, Gu Qingrui took a ringing bell from the space and spread the news throughout the nearby villages that he would be available to treat illnesses. When he was free after that, he went to the mountains with Tian Jiawang. Meanwhile, Zhou bought another few water tanks, drilled some holes in them, and started growing bean sprouts. Whenever she had time, she would take some rolls of cloth to Sister Tian to learn how to make clothes and shoes. Of course, she would let them teach her for nothing. She would bring snacks for the 2 girls every time she went over. Since Gu Qingxi ate the wild chicken eggs and no longer had to go hungry at night, he became more and more daring. Every time he went up the mountain, he began to look for food to fill his stomach. In the blink of an eye, the first batch of bean sprouts had grown and could be sold. Chapter 43 Promoting bean sprouts. After breakfast, Gu Qingrui borrowed Tian Jiawang's cart and pushed the 2 pots of bean sprouts to town. When they arrived in town, Gu Qingrui pushed the bean sprouts directly to a restaurant not far from the pier. Zhou looked at the red building not far from the restaurant and looked at Gu Qingrui in surprise. Are you sure you want to sell it to Hongyun restaurant? Yes, when I went to town with you to sell the wild game, I had already inquired about it. Among the 4 restaurants in this town, only manager Lu of Hongyun restaurant gave the fairest and most trustworthy prices. The key was that Hongyun restaurant is a chain restaurant, and there are rumors that there is a big shot behind it. Even if the Qiao family finds out, they won't dare go too far. After Gu Qingrui finished explaining, he pushed the cart and turned it into a small alley. When they arrived at the back door of Hongyun restaurant, they saw a few other vendors in front of them delivering ingredients, so the 2 of them had no choice but to line up obediently. Soon, it was their turn. Gu Qingrui stepped forward and greeted the middle-aged man in a long robe. Manager Lu, Gu Qingrui is here with the bean sprouts we discussed. Manager Lu was stunned for a moment. He turned his head, looked at him seriously, smiled, and said, "Oh, it's you. I'll have to take a good look at the rare thing you spoke of. After saying that, he walked to the front of the cart. Zhou immediately lifted the wet cloth from the 2 water tanks and pointed at them. These are green bean sprouts, vegetables suitable for stir-frying. These are normal bean sprouts. Although they can also be stir-fried, they will taste better if they go with pork. Of course, they are also delicious with fish. Manager Lu looked at Zhou in surprise and asked, "You must be Mrs. Gu. Can you cook all the dishes you mentioned?" "Yes, I've made them before. That's why I recommend them." "Oh, then I wonder if I would be able to try your cooking." "Naturally." "Alright, please bring your things and follow me to the kitchen." After Manager Lu finished speaking, he gave a few instructions to the waiter beside him and led them to the kitchen. He entered the kitchen. Because it was still early, there were only 2 kitchen helpers prepping vegetables inside. "Please go out and wait for a while," Manager Lu said to the helpers. "Yes." The 2 assistants immediately put down their work and looked at the 2 of them curiously before turning to leave. Manager Lu turned around and looked at Zhou expectantly. "Mrs. Gu, you can take a look. If you need anything else, just let me know." "Wait a moment." Zhou walked around the kitchen and found that the cooking skills of this era had developed well. At least the commonly used spices were complete. It was a pity that she was missing the main ingredient she would use today. The original her had it in her memory too. She turned to look at Manager Lu and asked, "Manager Lu, do you have chili? It's as long as a finger, red in color, and tastes spicy." Manager Lu was stunned for a moment before he said, "You're talking about peppers, right? That thing is usually used in colder places, so we don't eat much of it here." "Do you have to use it?" he asked. "Yes, then wait a moment." After Manager Lu said that, he turned around and walked out. A moment later, he returned with a handful of chili and handed it to her. "Is this enough?" "It's sufficient." After Zhou took it, she hesitated momentarily and said, "If you've never eaten chili before, please wait outside. You'll choke when I'm cooking. Please do as you please." Manager Lu turned around and left after that. Gu Qingrui knew her plan, so when Manager Lu went out, he immediately picked up a carp and began to gut it. Zhou prepared the bean sprouts she needed and then diced some meat for later use. Chapter 44 Taste Test. Zhou prepared all the ingredients she needed but couldn't find any numbing pepper, so she could only grab some more peppercorns for later use. After everything was prepared, Gu Shengrui's fish was also ready. Zhou went forward to marinate the fish. She then asked Gu Qingrui to help keep the fire going while she started to cook. The first dish was green bean sprouts stir-fried with vinegar, followed by green bean sprouts stir-fried with chives, and yellow bean sprouts stir-fried with diced meat. After she finished filling the plates, she started to steam the fish. Because the peppercorns and chilies had to be fried in advance, half of the restaurant was instantly filled with a spicy fragrance, making others choke and cough. However, the smell was very inviting. Therefore, when Manager Lu smelled it, he couldn't wait to rush over, even though he was choking with tears and snot flowing out. Naturally, Zhou and Gu Qingrui were choking on the spicy air. However, Gu Qingrui was used to spice, so he adapted to it quickly, and it lured out the hunger in his stomach. So after Zhou finished plating them, Gu Qingrui pulled on her clothes and asked, "Babe, shall we have steamed fish for lunch?" Zhou saw his face and nodded. "Alright, let's go find a place to buy fish later." Afterward, he saw Manager Lu hiding at the door and sneezing non-stop. "Manager Lu, it's all done. Do you want to try it while it's hot?" Yes. But let's talk in a private room. It's too choking here." After saying that, Manager Lu turned around and left. He sneezed as he walked, looking very embarrassed. Xiaoying and Gu Qingrui looked at each other. Then, the two took the 4 dishes and informed the servers watching to help them with the bowls and chopsticks. They soon followed Manager Lu into a private room on the 2nd floor. After placing the dishes down, Xiaoying and Gu Qingrui sat opposite him and smiled at Manager Lu. When Manager Lu saw this, he knew they were waiting for his reply after tasting it. However, when he saw the red layer of chili on the spicy steamed fish, he didn't dare to eat it and could only ask the waiter to help him taste it. As for himself, he taste-tested the other 3 dishes. Although the stir-fried yellow bean sprouts with diced meat dish were creative, they weren't particularly outstanding, so it was just a refreshing change of a meal. The stir-fried chives with bean sprouts were delicious, and his eyes lit up immediately. The last dish was green bean sprouts with vinegar, which he had thought would be very pungent. He nodded and asked, "Did Mrs. Gu put white vinegar in it?" He didn't expect that there would only be a faint spicy fragrance when it entered his mouth. The key point was that the faint vinegar allowed the green bean sprouts to be crisp and delicious. Manager Lu is undoubtedly a restaurant owner, you can tell with one bite. There are 2 reasons for adding white vinegar. One is that the color is clearer, and the other is that white vinegar has a simple taste and can improve the freshness of the vegetables. Xiaoying replied. The ingredients used are right. Manager Lu nodded in agreement and looked at the young man wearing a conflicted expression. Isn't it just a dish? It's not that scary. The waiter rolled his eyes secretly. If Manager Lu wasn't afraid, why wasn't he eating it? However, at the urging of Manager Lu, the waiter picked up a piece of fish and put it into his mouth. After a short while, his eyes lit up, tasting it earnestly. The fish meat didn't have any fishy taste but instead had a numbing spice. The most important thing was that it didn't affect the freshness and tenderness of the fish meat. It was simply the most delicious fish meat he had ever eaten. He couldn't help but pick up another piece and put it into his mouth, wolfing it down. Seeing this, Manager Lu knew that the dish's taste wasn't bad. After seeing that the waiter didn't react to the spice, he picked up a small piece of fish and put it in his mouth. Chapter 45 Selling Recipes. Although the spicy taste was hard to accept and it first entered Manager Liu's mouth, he soon realized that the fish meat was fresh and delicious. With one mouthful, he felt that all the pores on his body had opened up, making him super comfortable. The best thing was that it also whet his appetite. After eating 2 more fish pieces, he picked up the bean sprouts and put them in his mouth. This time, the bean sprouts had not only the fish's freshness but also a spicy taste. There was no fishy smell at all. Both husband and wife looked at Manager Liu's expression and knew he was delighted with the steamed fish and the vinegar-fried bean sprouts. At the very least they didn't have to worry about the sales of the bean sprouts. After eating 2 more pieces of fish, Manager Liu said to the young waiter, "Bring them down and let everyone have a taste." "Yes." The waiter tidied up the room and brought in a pot of tea. When Manager Liu saw this, he stood up and poured a cup of tea for the 2 of them. "Mr. Gu, what's the price of your bean sprouts?" "As far as I know, bean sprouts are a new dish, so it's not appropriate to sell them at a low price at the beginning. Moreover, these bean sprouts can be sold for the whole winter, so they are one of the few greens available in winter." "Are you sure you can supply it all winter?" "Yes, but there's a limited amount. Growing bean sprouts also requires heat, so it can only be done in-house." Manager Liu pondered for a moment and offered, "How about 5 coppers per pound?" 8 coppers. Gu Qingrui raised his hand and countered. 8 coppers it is, but you can only supply Hongyun restaurant. "Sure, but it's not difficult to grow these bean sprouts, so other people will likely catch on to them very quickly." "Well, rediscuss the price then." "I understand. Half a month." "Half a month is enough. How about we change the price then?" Alright, it's a deal then. Let's go over and weigh them. Gu Qingrui stood up and said. Wait, can I have the recipes for the 4 dishes? Manager Lu pointed at himself and looked at Zhou hesitantly. Although he didn't like to eat heavy meals, many people had rich tastes, especially in the winter. He believed that once the spicy steamed fish was launched, it would definitely sell very well. Oh, then I wonder how much is Manager Lu willing to pay? Zhou asked curiously. To be honest, she didn't plan to sell the recipe before. After all, she didn't think the recipe was a secret. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone up the mountain to dig for medicinal herbs. However, since the business was being offered to her, she wasn't stupid enough to reject it. 100 taels for 4 dishes. Manager Lu hesitated for a moment before offering. Deal. Please prepare a piece of paper to write it down. Then, find a chef you can trust. I'll teach him step by step later. Zhou replied readily. After all, the dishes contain no technicalities other than the steamed fish. Wait a moment. After Manager Lu finished speaking, he turned around and went outside to get a pen and paper. Zhou started to recite the recipe, and Manager Lu recorded it. Soon, he had written down the 4 recipes. In the end, Zhou reminded him, I don't know if you know about numbing peppers. It's a kind of green pepper with a strong numbing taste. The taste will be better if you change the peppercorn to numbing pepper. This. I've never really noticed them, and I'll try to look for them later. Let's go to the kitchen for now. After Manager Lu finished speaking, he brought them down to weigh the bean sprouts, which totaled about 50 pounds. Manager Lu paid them a check worth 100 silver and 4 copper coins. After waiting, a chef in his 30s walked in while humming a tune. Manager Lu beckoned him over and said, Mr. Zhou, I've received 4 recipes today. You can learn them from Mrs. Gu. After seeing Zhou Ying's young face, Chef Zhou showed a dubious look. However, looking at Manager Liu's serious expression, he finally nodded and took her into the kitchen. Chapter 46 Treatment. After they were done teaching Chef Zhou, the couple happily pushed the cart out the door. They first went to the bank to convert the check worth 100 taels of silver into real silver and put it in the interspace. Then, Zhou looked at Gu Qingrui and said, Let's go, Rui. We're in luck today. We're going to be able to go shopping once. Sure, let's go buy some clothes first. Gu Qingrui looked at the patched sackcloth clothes on her body and said. Yeah, I'll also buy you a long robe. If you're going to treat patients, you can't be looking too shabby. Zhou agreed. Gu Qingrui smiled and nodded. Then, the two of them walked toward a clothes shop. However, the two did not dare to be too eye-catching and only bought 2 sets of coarse cloth each. Lastly, they spent 1 silver on buying Gu Qingrui an ordinary satin robe. Afterward, they went to the grain store to buy more green beans and soybeans. Of course, the quantity was not large, but it could be used as a cover. Not long after leaving the grain store, he saw Mrs. Lu and Mrs. Yao each carrying a bag of snacks. They walked over while talking and laughing and quickly turned to go to the nearby jewelry store. Seeing this, Zhou said indignantly, These 2 people really have the same bad taste and are equally shameless. What else could it be? When we left the capital, our relatives and friends sent us a lot of money, so our family wasn't supposed to be in such a problematic state as it seemed. It was just that there were not many wives who could tolerate the children of concubines. So when we split up, I told the patriarch that I wouldn't care for Mrs. Lu in her old age, and my so-called father also had nothing to say. In this feudalistic society where filial piety is more important than the heavens, I can't believe you dare to say such treasonous words. Zhou tilted her head and whispered, but gave him a thumbs up. That's because Mrs. Lu went too far. Moreover, she was promoted to wife from concubine. She shouldn't receive any gratitude for not raising my original body, nor did she teach me a single thing. Also, she has a son of her own, so why should we take care of her when she's old? So, this is a pretty good outcome. Indeed, otherwise, our days wouldn't be so peaceful. Let's go, it's getting late. I want to go home and eat that steamed fish. Gu Qingrui pushed the cart and walked forward after saying that. Zhou saw this and immediately rushed over. On the way, they ran into Qian Jiala, driving an ox cart. Just as Gu Qingrui was about to greet him, Qian Jiala jumped off the bullock cart and said, "Qingrui, we're looking for you. Brother Jiaxing broke his leg when he was carrying wood. If you think you can treat it, let's go." Gu Qingrui immediately let go of the cart in his hands and went forward to give Qian Jiaxing a thorough check. He's fine. It's just a fracture in his calf bone. After bandaging it, he'll just need to take some anti-inflammatory medicine and rest. It's good that you can treat it. Let's head back now. After Qian Jiala said this, he looked at the cart and said, "You guys head back in our cart, I'll push your cart back for you. Then don't mind if we do. Zhou can help me when she goes back." Gu Qingrui immediately turned the ox cart around and let Zhou sit in it, and they immediately rushed to the village. After returning home, Zhou went into their house and tidied up the brick bed. After Gu Qingrui carried Qian Jiaxing to the brick bed, the two entered the west room. Then, Gu Qingrui requested Zhou to bring out some anesthetic, many bandages, and 2 splints. Afterward, Zhou went to the kitchen to get some hot water and handed it to Gu Qingrui. Then, she stuffed a clean bandage into Qian Jiaxing's mouth to prevent him from biting his tongue due to the pain. Gu Qingrui wrung a towel with hot water and waited until it was half chilled before he cleaned Qian Jiaxing's leg and gave him some local anesthesia. Finally, Qian Jiala came over and helped put on the splint. Chapter 47 Instructions. After everything was done, Gu Qingrui brought a stool over and gently placed Qian Jiaxing's injured leg on it. Finally, he washed his hands and turned to Qian Jiala, sitting limply by the brick bed. "Uncle Jiala, where are Uncle Jiaxing's family members? Do you need me to give them some instructions on cleaning his wounds? He should be here soon. He was injured on the mountain and I've already sent someone to inform his family." Just as Qian Jiala finished his words, a dog's bark came from outside, and Zhou immediately turned around and headed out. When she went out, she saw a burly wild dog they had taken in, raising his tail and barking at the 2 men at the door. They were Qian Jiaxing's father and brother, the carpenter who had helped repair their roof. "Zhuang, go back to the shed," Zhou immediately shouted. Although Zhuang didn't bark out again, he didn't intend to step aside. She had no choice but to walk over and pat him on the head. "Let's go home. I'll make you something delicious later." Zhuang lowered his head and whimpered twice. The dog turned around and ran into the small nest in the woodshed. Without waiting for Zhou to speak, Mr. Qian's father asked, "I heard that your Uncle Xing is here for treatment. How's his injury?" "Fourth Grandpa Qian, Uncle Jiaqiang, don't worry. Uncle Jiaxing's bone fracture will be healed in 2 to 3 months. Zhou said as she led them into the house. "That's good." Fourth Grandpa Qian heaved a sigh of relief. After entering the house, Gu Qingrui greeted them and brought them to the brick bed. "Fourth Grandpa Qian, Uncle Jiaqiang, don't worry. Uncle Jiaxing's injuries are not severe. However, he has to take good care of himself for about a month, and it would be best if he didn't do any heavy work before the new year. Also, although the injury is not severe, it will still be very painful for the next 3 days. You have to take good care of him and don't let him get injured again. In addition, it's best not to walk for half a month. It's best to hang his leg as high as possible to reduce the pain and speed the recovery. Does he need to take any medicine? Fourth Grandpa Chien nodded and asked. Take some medicine for the first 3 days. It can stabilize the injury and reduce the pain at the same time. If he has a fever, remember to inform me. Gu Qingrui said after he was done with the treatment. Have a seat, and I'll get the medicine now. After saying that, he turned around and went to the west room. Zhou handed over 2 stools and said, Fourth Grandpa Chien, Uncle Jiaqiang, please take a seat. You go and do your stuff. We will return after getting the medicine as there are still many things to do at home. Fourth Grandpa Chien said. Sure. Then you guys can have a chat with Uncle Jiaxing. After Zhou finished speaking, she turned around and went to the kitchen. For lunch, they had steamed fish, which Zhuang couldn't eat. So, she went to the kitchen, took half a pound of minced meat from her interspace, and cooked a small bowl of meat porridge with crushed rice. At the same time, she took out a 3-pound carp from her interspace, sliced it, and marinated it. When she was almost done, Gu Qingrui walked in and said, Babe, you're pretty fast. That's right. By the way, what else do you want to eat other than the steamed fish? I'll leave it to you to arrange. I've been eating too clean during this period of time, so I'm craving something rich. Alright, you watch the fire. I'll get the ingredients ready. After Zhou finished speaking, she took out a giant blue crab, about 1 pound in weight, and some crispy lotus roots from her interspace. After they were washed, the blue crab was steamed in the pot, and a dipping sauce was made by mixing purple perilla leaf and ginger. After the crisp lotus roots were soaked in water, she stir-fried them with scallion, ginger, garlic, red pepper, salt, soy sauce, and white sugar. Finally, when the porridge was ready, she asked Gu Qingrui to bring the porridge to the shed and give it to Zhuang. Then, the 2 of them worked together to make the steamed fish. Chapter 48 Increase volume. After setting up the table, the 2 of them looked at the dishes on the table and drooled. They had been here for half a month but had not had a good meal. Zhou took out a bottle of red wine and said, Come on, Rui. Let's celebrate our new life today. Of course. Oh, right, take out the 8 crab legs for me. I'm going to clean up the crab remains. Then I'll eat the ready-made ones. After Zhou finished speaking, she took out the crab's 8 legs and handed them to him. Then, she found a bottle opener and popped the red wine open. Then, she took out a decanter and 2 wine glasses. After they were done, the 2 clinked their glasses with a smile, picked up their chopsticks, and ate eagerly. After the meal, both of them were so full that Zhou felt dizzy. She was too lazy to wash the dishes, so she simply put them into her interspace. Then, she thought of Zhuang's fierce look when he barked at their guests. She turned to Gu Qingrui and said, Rui, tie Zhuang up during the day in case someone comes over. Don't let him bite someone. This is indeed a problem. Later, I'll wedge a stake in the woodshed and let him guard the woodshed during the day. I'll let him free at night to watch our house. After chatting for a while, Zhou got up and made a pot of black tea to drink. After their feelings of food coma subsided, the 2 started working on separate things. The following day, after sending the bean sprouts to Hongyun restaurant, Gu Qingrui bought another batch of 7 small water tanks. Their supply of bean sprouts could not meet the demand of Manager Liu, who had requested to double the amount. After Zhou used an electric drill to drill holes in the water tank, she looked at the row of full water tanks. She turned to Gu Qingrui and said, Rui, we must dig up a ditch. Otherwise, moving so many water tanks back and forth every day is very tiring. Also, if we flush the water outside when it gets cold, the bean sprouts will probably freeze. You're right. But it's too troublesome to build a ditch. Why don't we make a small pond and build a pipe to let the water flow out? It'll also be more convenient to wash vegetables in the future. Gu Qingrui turned around and walked out after he finished speaking. Build a pond. Yes, I remember we have a glue-like material in the interspace that can replace cement. Zhou nodded and began to pick beans to soak. Gu Qingrui took the opportunity to go to Qian Jiaxing's house. After confirming that he did not have a fever last night, he reminded them of a few things to take note of and did not pay any more attention to him. After returning, he went to the mountain with Zhou and brought back a few stone slabs. They quickly built a platform that was only half a meter high. He also used thick bamboo as a water pipe, which led directly to the sewer in the courtyard. The next morning, the two used it when they re-washed the bean sprouts. It was quite convenient, and they didn't even need to carry more water to wash their vegetables. Following that, as Gu Qingrui mended Qian Jiaxing's leg, more and more people came to see him for their illnesses. Zhou also finished making 4 sets of clothes for them. One day, Zhou saw the sun shining brightly outside, so she went up the mountain to chop some firewood. After all, the fire must not be put out with the bean sprouts around, or it would be troublesome if they froze. She didn't expect to see Sister Tian walking out with a basket as soon as she went out. Zhou was amazed and asked, "Sister Tian, are you going out?" "That's right. I heard that Sister Hua has hatched a new batch of chicks, so I'm planning to take 2 of them. Sister Zhou, do you want some?" Sister Tian turned her head and offered. "It's fine. I've never raised one before, so I'm afraid I can't keep it alive. Let's wait until spring when it's easier." Zhou smiled and shook her head. "That's true. It'll go over then. We'll talk later." After Sister Tian said that, she left in a hurry. As for Zhou, she rushed up the mountain. Chapter 49. A new source of wealth. Just as Zhou reached the foot of the mountain, she heard someone calling her name. She had no choice but to stop and look in the direction of the voice. Then she saw Mrs. Bai waving a basket at her from a distance. Zhou hesitated for a moment, but she still trotted over and asked, "Auntie, are you also going up the mountain?" "That's right. I want to go up the mountain to look for Puraria. My mother likes to drink Puraria powder, and it's a kind thought to bring it back for the new year." Mrs. Bai replied. "The Puraria powder is sure a good thing. It can clear away heat, remove phlegm and stop coughing, and beautify the skin. I'm sure Granny Bai's health will improve after drinking them." "It's true. I heard from the doctor that drinking some Puraria powder occasionally is good for a woman's body. When my mother was young, she was a servant for a large family. However, it's not easy to buy it. Even if there is some for sale, it'll be bought by the big families, so we can only go into the mountains and look for it ourselves. Your filial piety is commendable. Let's go together then. At least we will be there for each other." Zhou agreed. At the same time, she found a new way to make money. She had a lot of Puraria and Puraria powder in her interspace and could try to sell a batch of them later. "That's what I wanted. Let's go. It's going to be cold soon." Mrs. Bai replied with a smile and lifted her legs to walk up the mountain. Zhou saw this and immediately followed. However, Zhou soon discovered that Mrs. Bai was not aimlessly searching but had an accurate destination. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Auntie, do you know where to find them?" "I'm not sure, but I found it near a spot here last year. I think there should be some nearby." "You're right, these medicinal herbs do grow in spots," Zhou replied. After that, she didn't say anything more and just followed her. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. After crossing a mountain, the two arrived at another hill on the sunny side. Mrs. Bike stopped and said, I found it here last year. Let's look around the area, whoever finds it will have it. She paused and looked at Zhou. By the way, do you know what Puraria looks like? I know the ones that are dug out. I'll try to look for them. Zhou nodded. After that, the two separated and began to search all over the mountain fields. Soon, Mrs. Bai found one of them and showed it to Zhou, and the two went separate ways again to look for more. Needless to say, there were lots of Puraria here. In a short time, Zhou found 2 big roots. Just as she was feeling happy, she suddenly heard a scream from Mrs. Bai. Zhou was stunned for a moment and quickly looked for where the voice came from. When she saw Mrs. Bai sitting on the ground in a sorry state, she quickly went forward to help her up. Auntie, are you all right? I'm fine. I just missed a step and fell. It hurts a little, but it'll be fine. Mrs. Bai replied with a smile. Let's find a clean place to sit for a while. After Zhou finished speaking, she helped her over to sit on a clean stone. After this, Zhou also sat down beside her. She realized that Mrs. Bai had already found 4, but they were not as big as hers. I heard that people have recently been coming to Shengru's place to seek medical treatment, asked Mrs. Bai. I was afraid that no one would have dared to come to our house if it hadn't been for the recommendation of Uncle Jiala and Uncle Jiaxing. That's also because Qingrui is capable. In the future, you will have a stable income and no longer need to pick herbs on the mountain on a cold day. That's true. Otherwise, if it snowed, our livelihood would be over. Speaking of snow, you should store more food at home. We have heavy snow here yearly, and it will be difficult to walk out. Thank you for your reminder, Auntie. I'll remember it. Chapter 50. Being lectured, the two of them chatted for a while before they got up and looked for more Puraria. It was not until the sun was about to set that the two of them supported each other and headed back to the village. However, no matter how fast they rushed, the sky was already dark when they returned to the village. When they were about to reach the village entrance, they suddenly saw someone walking over with a torch. Before they could see who it was, they heard a series of dog barks. They saw Zhuang running over happily. He came to the front of the two and circled 3 times before stopping. What a young couple you two are, Mrs. Bai teased with a smile. It seems that Qingrui has come to pick you up. Auntie, you only know how to tease me. Zhou pouted. At that time, Gu Qingrui also walked over. He was stunned when he saw Mrs. Bai and said, Auntie, so you guys were together. Just now, Tina was looking for you everywhere. Really? Then I'll have to hurry back. After Mrs. Bai said that, she picked up her basket and jogged back. Seeing this, Zhou was relieved. At least she was not injured on the mountain. Then, she handed Gu Qingrui the Puraria tied with a rope and said, Rui, it's time to go home. Yes. Gu Qingrui took the Puraria, called on Zhuang, and they headed back home together. When they reached home, Zhou prepared warm water and washed up, while Gu Qingrui went to the kitchen to plate their food. After the meal, Zhou stretched her back and was about to lie down when Gu Qingrui pulled her up and said, Don't come back so late in the future. It'll be dangerous if you encounter a bad guy. Zhou, who thought she had dodged a bullet, immediately sat up and replied earnestly, I'll be more careful in the future. The mountains here are much more dangerous than the mountains in modern times. Don't be complacent, said Gu Qingrui helplessly as he tapped her nose. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. However, his eyes were filled with gentleness and worriedness. I definitely won't. After Zhou finished speaking, she leaned her head on his shoulder and said, By the way, I heard from Auntie Joshi that the wealthy families here like to drink Puraria powder. We seem to have quite a lot of it in our interspace. Let's sell a batch of them later. Speaking of value, the silver ear plant sells the best. The last time I went to Dr. Luo's place to sell medicine, I saw him sell 2 for 1 tael of silver. That expensive? Yes, the growing environment of the silver ear is relatively harsh. The main point is that there is no artificial cultivation here, so that's why it's expensive. Unfortunately, our city does not produce silver ears. It seems that the interspace is a treasure mountain. Indeed, but no matter what we sell, there must be a limit. After all, the production of wild herbs is limited. I know. Why are you so sleepy? Gu Qingrui looked at her face and turned to ask. I'm fine, but my waist feels uncomfortable. My stomach feels cold too. Zhou paused and said, oh no, maybe I'm about to get my period. I'm 80% confident. Take a hot shower in the interspace, and it'll make you a bowl of grass herb drink. Gu Qingrui said as he turned around and walked toward the west room. Seeing this, Zhou turned around and took off her coat. She got the bed ready, entered her interspace, and took a hot bath in her bathtub. When her hair was almost dry, she put on her pajamas and went out of the space. When she came out, Gu Qingrui had already boiled the medicine and was sitting in front of the bedside table, reading a book. When he saw her come out, he pointed at the medicine and said, drink it quickly. After you drink it, go to bed and rest. It'll do all the work inside the interspace. Zhou nodded. She picked up the medicine, tried it, and found it almost chilled. She downed it and asked, when will you enter the space? Chapter 51 Advice. I will finish this chapter before entering, said Gu Qingrui as he lowered his head and continued reading. Zhou saw this, and she took a table lamp out of her interspace, replaced the oil lamp in front of him, and then closed the red curtains on their windows. This way, no one would notice the abnormality of their lights. About an hour later, Gu Qingrui put the book in his hand down and said, babe, you should rest. Send me in. Okay, Zhou responded, took his hand, and sent him into her interspace. When she came out, she looked at the booklet on the table curiously, wondering if she had become illiterate after transmigrating. When she saw the old words and characters on it, she finally heaved a sigh of relief. At least she could recognize 70% to 80% of it. Then, she found it was a history book, so she got under her blanket and read it with curiosity. However, she quickly realized that it was not a proper history book but a brief history snippet written by a person. It was just what she wanted, so she began to read it. After 2 hours, she finally finished reading it, and she realized that this continent was utterly unfamiliar to her. The Ming dynasty had no connection with the Ming dynasty in their original world. The only similarity was that, because of the relative richness of the land, enemies on all sides surrounded them, and there would be large and small battles every year. The location of Dongyang Prefecture was similar to that of Shandong, the place they were in. The only difference was that Dongyang had more mountains and rivers and was more prosperous. Then, she put the book back in its original place and went into the interspace to boil a pot of water for herself, planning to make 2 cups of milk. Then, she looked outside and saw that Gu Qingrui was already drying the herbs. She walked over and said, Rui, do you need any help? Why did you come in? Is your waist still uncomfortable? It's still a little sore, but it's not a big deal. I can finish this little work very quickly. Why don't you go and cook something to eat? We can go to sleep after a small bite. All right, he said. Zhou responded and turned back to the villa. Just as she was about to cook some small wontons to eat, she suddenly felt discomfort and immediately took a sanitary towel to the toilet. When she came out again, she felt her back was sorer than ever, with her stomach uncomfortable. Soon, she was covered in a cold sweat. This was new to her, as she always had smooth sailing periods in her past life. She just sat at the side and started to cook the wontons. Gu Qingrui returned from work and saw her head full of cold sweat. He quickly washed his hands and came over. "Babe, are you feeling uncomfortable?" "Yes, it's already here." Zhou replied absent-mindedly. "Give me your hand." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he grabbed her left hand, took her pulse, and checked her right hand as well. Finally, he wiped her sweat and said, "Your body is still young, and your period is unstable. In addition, you still have a slight cold, so that is why you feel so uncomfortable. You'll feel better next month if you take a few more doses of cold medicine. But you're not allowed to eat ice cream because it's cold, and try not to eat oily and spicy food." "Ah, what? If you don't listen, you'll suffer the next time you have your period." Zhou immediately shut her mouth after hearing that. After all, she didn't want to experience the feeling she had now again. Afterward, Zhou drank a cup of milk, and Gu Qingrui ate a bowl of wonton. The two of them went out of her interspace to sleep after they were filled. However, once Zhou lay down, she felt uncomfortable no matter her position. Her waist was in such discomfort that it might well be broken, and she couldn't sleep at all. Gu Qingrui saw that, but there was nothing he could do. She was on a period, and he could not give her any drugs for this. He could only reach out and gently rub her stomach. Chapter 52 House Call. Although Zhou didn't feel the slightest relief, she didn't dare to move again. Otherwise, neither of them would be able to get up tomorrow. Sure enough, Gu Qingrui fell asleep soon after she quieted down. However, Zhou couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned for half the night and changed her sanitary napkin twice. She didn't fall asleep until it was almost dawn. When she woke up the next day, the sun had already risen. She could hear running water outside and knew he was tending to the bean sprouts. Then, she quickly went into her interspace to wash up, came out, put on her clothes, and went to the kitchen. She took water from her interspace and washed the bean sprouts with him. After they were done, Gu Qingrui turned his head and asked, "You didn't sleep well last night, right? Your eye bags are heavy." "Yeah, I never thought that menstruating could be so torturous. I can only say that you were lucky in your past life. So, you must be more careful from now on, understand?" "I understand." Zhou was persuaded this time. "I've made red date millet porridge. You can take out some bok choy and stir-fry them, and it'll go well with the steamed buns." "Understood." Zhou took out the things he had mentioned, then sat aside and started a fire. After the meal, Gu Qingrui borrowed a small cart and was about to go to town to deliver the bean sprouts when a woman suddenly ran in, causing Zhuang to bark loudly. The woman immediately retreated in fear. Zhou quickly stepped forward to stop him and asked the woman, "Hi, is there something you need?" My husband went hunting in the mountains and was bumped by a wild boar. I'm here to ask Dr. Gu for help." The woman patted her chest in fear. "How are his injuries?" Gu Qingrui asked. "I'm not sure, but there's a cut on his stomach, and his intestines seem to be flowing out. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site." "Thanks," Gu Qingrui replied, after a moment of hesitation. "That's very serious. I'm only 30% confident in treating him, so why don't you go to the town and get a doctor? Such a severe injury could only be sutured. More importantly, it might still not be enough to save the patient." However, no suturing technique was learned in the original Gu Shengru's memory, so even if he wanted to make a move, he had to get their guarantee. Otherwise, if something really happened, he would be unable to bear the responsibility. The woman's eyes brightened. No, no, my husband was dragged back from the town. Let alone 30%, even a 10% chance is fine. I'll say the worst case is that I can't guarantee anything. I know. Do treat him as long as there's a chance. Okay, wait a moment. I'll go pack my medicine box. After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he glanced at Zhou Ying, and they walked into the house together. When the woman saw this, she immediately retreated to the door and began to walk around uneasily. After Zhou Ying entered the house, she immediately took out the first aid box from their previous life and handed it to him. When Gu Qingrui saw this, he only took out a suture needle, strings made from animal guts, a silver needle, a bottle of iodophor, and cotton. He did not take out anything else. Then, he looked at Zhou Ying. You look for Brother Tian later and ask him to send the bean sprouts over. You don't have to go. I know. Zhou Ying nodded. After he left, she put away the first aid kit. However, she did not intend to trouble Tian Zhuang. Instead, she locked the door and pulled the cart to town. However, she regretted it halfway through. At first, she didn't think much of it, but the long distance was sure to be tiring physical work. This also gave her the idea of buying an animal to pull their cart. Manager Liu, waiting at the town's entrance, was stunned when he saw her from afar. He immediately went up to her and asked, Mrs. Gu, why are you the one here to deliver the goods today? My husband had an emergency, so I had to come. I hope I didn't delay your business. Zhou Ying raised her head and asked with a dry smile. Chapter 53 Take on the job. I see. Let me take over it since you're sweating heavily. After saying that, Manager Liu went forward and took the cart. Zhou Ying accepted his offer after hearing this, as her waist was really sore. After the two arrived at the restaurant, Zhou Ying didn't even take the money and ran straight to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw Chef Zhou scolding a waiter with a gloomy face. Zhou Ying listened for a while and knew that the quality of the tofu was too poor. She went up to look and found it was still okay. It was just that the filtering wasn't done well, and the taste would be off. Chef Zhou didn't have the mood to continue scolding when he saw Zhou Ying. Instead, he said, all right, go to the market and see if you can buy good tofu. Also, remember to tell Mr. Zhang that if something similar happens again in the future, our restaurant will no longer use his tofu. I heard that Mr. Zhang is not here anymore. His nephew sent over this tofu. He's gone. How? I heard that he fell in his yard at dawn. It was too late when anyone else realized that, so, since that's the case, let's change to another store in the future. Can I take over? Zhou Ying asked. She asked because there was nothing to do at home besides washing those bean sprouts. She could kill time if she took over making their tofu, and it didn't matter how much she could profit from this. Chef Zhou looked at her in surprise and asked, then tell me why I don't want this tofu. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks, it's mainly because the filtering process is too sloppy, and it's a little overcooked. It will make the tofu hard and rough, which will affect the taste. Chef Zhou nodded in satisfaction. Then make one for me to try tomorrow. I'll let you take over the work if it's good. At this point, he handed her the money bag in his hand and said, oh right, this is the money for the bean sprouts. Also, Manager Liu wanted me to pass you a message. He wants you to deliver the vegetables earlier if possible. Alright, I'll leave you to your work then. Zhou Ying took the money bag, nodded, then turned around and pushed the small cart out. After leaving Hongyun restaurant, Zhou Ying went straight back. On the way, she bought a pound of salted pork from the grocery store. When she saw someone selling dried preserved vegetables, she purchased 2 pounds of them and planned to make some steamed pork later. On the other hand, Gu Qingrui followed the woman to her house and found out they were of the same clan and had the surname Gu. However, they were almost 5 times removed and distant relatives at best. He greeted the people guarding the door and went straight into the patient's room. After carefully examining the injured man, he found that although the injury was severe, it was not fatal. It was just that he had lost too much blood, and it looked scary. He had to be treated as soon as possible, or he would die of blood loss. He retreated and said, "I'll say the same thing. I'm only 30% confident. If you want me to proceed, I will try my best, but just don't blame me." "Sure, please treat him as long as there's a glimmer of hope." The woman hurriedly nodded. "How much silver do you need?" A middle-aged man asked worriedly. "We're from the same clan, so the treatment fee is free, but you'll have to pay for the medicine." After saying this, Gu Qingrui pondered for a moment and said, "If everything goes well, 1 tael of silver will be enough. Of course, you'll still have to buy more medicine for his recovery. We are in debt to you, Qingrui. Well, proceed with the treatment." The older man sitting in the middle, who had been frowning, spoke. "All right, get me a pot of boiled water as soon as possible. Remember to wash the pot clean and not leave a single oil stain in it." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he asked for an oil lamp and entered the room to stop the bleeding with his silver needles. Chapter 54 Treatment. After the hot water was ready, Gu Qingrui carefully cleaned the external part of the wound. After cleaning up, he carefully treated the wound with iodophor. After repeatedly checking to ensure that there was no dirt left, he used his silver needles to stimulate the patient's acupoints to achieve the effect of local paralysis. He got 2 men to come in and hold the patient down. Then, under the dumbfounded gazes of everyone, the wound was quickly and carefully stitched together. After he was done, he sat at the side and said, "You can cover the patient with a blanket now. Remember, the blanket must be clean. It's best if it has been exposed to the sun, or it'll be easy to get the wound infected. We know about this. We just hung the blanket to dry," one of the men said. Then, he went and brought a new blanket over. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui took a pen and paper from his medicine box and wrote down a prescription. "Go to Luo's pharmacy to get some medicine as mine isn't complete." After speaking, he handed the prescription to one of them and gave a few more instructions to the people present. After chatting for a while, he turned around and walked out. At the same time, he also understood that this family's seniority was the highest in the Gu clan. Although the older man from before was about the same age as the patriarch, he was 1 generation older. Even the patriarch respectfully addressed him as his 9th uncle, while Gu Qingrui addressed him as his 9th grandpa. He had to address the injured patient as his 13th uncle. When he reached the house door, he saw Zhou coming back with a small cart. His face suddenly turned dark, but he didn't lose his temper. Instead, he took the small cart and returned it to the Tian family. When the 2 of them returned home, Gu Qingrui helped her to her seat and said, "What do you want to eat for lunch?" "I'll make it." Zhou didn't reject his offer. She took a piece of tofu and half a pound of pork from her interspace and said, "You can make anything you like. There are still a few steamed buns in the interspace, and it's enough for us to eat." Gu Qingrui took the 2 ingredients and turned to leave. Zhou lay flat on the brick bed, and suddenly her waist felt much better. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. Honestly, she had never thought lying flat on a hard surface would be so comfortable. It seemed that she would have to be more careful in the future. After the meal, Zhou told Gu Qingrui that she had accepted the tofu business. Gu Qingrui frowned. There are 3 hardships in life: riding a boat, forging iron, and selling tofu. We don't lack money, so I think we should just forget it. Besides, I suspect that the old-fashioned tofu mentioned by Chef Zhou needs to be ground with a stone mill. It's definitely not possible to use a fully automatic one. Let's just give it a try. We'll see if we can take it or not. Anyway, it's not a big deal to make 2 plates of tofu a day. Zhou suggested. Alright, there's a mill in the village. I'll go and buy one later. Gu Qingrui answered. By the way, should we buy a donkey or a cow? It's too tiring to pull a cart to town every day. Zhou asked. There's a big fair tomorrow. Let's go to town and see if there's anything for sale. Gu Qingrui thought of his 13 uncle's condition and asked her for a few more tablets of fever medicine and anti-inflammatory medicine. Then, he went out to buy a stone mill and brought it back. He then took the first aid box and hurried out the door. As soon as he left, Mrs. Bai came to their house again, wanting to dig for more Puraria roots, but Zhou declined by saying that she was not feeling well. After she left, Zhou took out 20 pounds of soybeans and weeded the bad ones. After that, she washed them twice and soaked them in a bucket. After dinner, Gu Qingrui was worried about his 13th uncle, so he had to go there again. Zhou freed Air Zhuang and went straight into her interspace. She then collected the ripe fruits, eggs, and duck eggs. After she was done, she ate a big apple, went out to light the fire, and went back to her interspace to sleep. Chapter 55. By a donkey. Zhou woke up early the following day. After washing the bean sprouts, she started the stone mill to grind the beans. However, just as she set it up, Gu Qingrui rushed back to take it and said, "Leave this to me. Go back and sleep for a while before you catch a cold." "I'm fine. I slept in the interspace last night and feel much better now." Zhou said this, then changed the topic, asking, "Oh right, what's the situation? Is he better now?" "Fortunately, I gave him a special anti-inflammatory pill before bed last night. Otherwise, he would have been in danger. But when I went back, he was already stable. I'll take a look when I come back from town. If the fever doesn't come back, he should be fine," Gu Qingrui said as he started to push the mill. Zhou didn't say anything after hearing that. Instead, she took a spoon and began to scoop up the beans. However, according to Chef Zhou's request, she only managed to make 1 plate of tofu. After boiling the soy milk, she skimmed it to make a few pieces of dried yuba, and the rest was pressed into dried beans. After everything, there were 2 bowls of soy milk left. Zhou took a bag of half-finished deep-fried dough sticks from her interspace, fried them, and the 2 had a warm breakfast. After the meal, Zhou marinated the dried tofu and stamped out the fireplace. She went to town with Gu Qingrui to see if the tofu could pass the chef's test and buy a donkey cart. Zhou Ying's tofu-making skills were quite good, so Chef Zhou happily handed the work to them and ordered 2 plates of tofu daily. However, the price was 1 copper cheaper than the outside, 4 coppers for 1 pound. Fortunately, the couple were satisfied as they didn't have to peddle their goods. After leaving Hongyun restaurant, the 2 went to the market and bought 10 pounds of ribs. Then they went to the livestock market. As soon as she entered, a man in his 20s approached her and asked, "Do the 2 of you want to buy an ox?" An ox that came of age 2 years ago only cost 15 taels of silver. "A yellow ox?" Gu Qingrui asked. "Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks, it's a yellow ox. We can't raise buffaloes with the weather here. Do you have a donkey or mule?" The man's enthusiasm immediately dropped, but he said, "There's a donkey. I'll take you there." After speaking, he brought the 2 of them to a corner. When he arrived, he said to the old man feeding a donkey, "Uncle's son, I've brought you someone looking for donkeys." "All right, thank you, Ertzi. I'll treat you to beef noodles for lunch. Then I'll be waiting. After the man finished speaking, he pointed at Gu Qingrui and his wife, then turned and left. Gu Qingrui nodded at Uncle Sun and observed the 3 donkeys in front of him. Finally, he chose the one on the far left and went forward to check the donkey's mouthpart. After confirming that it was younger than 2 years old, he asked, "Uncle Sun, how much are you selling this donkey for? I didn't expect you to know your stuff. To be honest, this donkey has just been bought. It has just come of age and is fat and strong. If you want it, it'll cost 10 taels of silver, but I'll give you an elmwood cart to go with it." Uncle Sun indicated a direction after he finished speaking. Gu Qingrui turned his head and saw a brand new donkey cart. He walked up and took a look. Besides the wheels being made of wood, he was satisfied with everything else. Even the saddle was fitted. "Then do you have a whip? Give me one, and it'll save me the trouble of making it." "The whip is not a problem. I'll give you one." Uncle Sun pulled a whip from the side and threw it to him. "Thanks." Gu Qingrui took it and thanked him. After that, he looked at Zhou. Zhou handed over 5 taels of whole silver with a pained expression, and the other 5 taels consisted of broken silver and copper coins. Chapter 56. Seeking advice. After settling the bill, Uncle Sun taught Gu Qingrui how to set up the cart and drive it. The two lifted their small cart onto the donkey cart and went home. When Zhou returned the cart, she took 5 pounds of pork ribs and handed them to Sister Tian. "Sister Tian, give these ribs to Dehua and Erhua to improve their diets." "How can we?" Sister Tian wanted to decline, but Zhou stopped her and said, "Sister Tian, you don't have to be so polite with us. We're neighbors, and you've helped us a lot. Please take it." Sister Tian replied, "Oh, then don't hesitate if you need us for something." "I want." After Zhou finished speaking, she turned around and was about to return when she saw Sister Tian's face full of hesitation. She paused and asked, "Sister Tian, is there anything you need? Just let us know. If it's within our means, we will definitely help." "Did your family buy a donkey cart?" "Yeah, it's embarrassing to borrow your cart every day." "Do you guys earn a lot of money by selling bean sprouts?" Zhou was stunned for a moment and shook her head. "It's alright, but the money for buying the donkey is mainly from picking herbs. However, I can teach you if you want to learn how to grow bean sprouts. Even if you don't sell them to a restaurant, the price of this new vegetable will not be low in the market." Tian Dawa's eyes brightened up. She felt that her return with her kids had dragged down her brother. If they could have a stable income, they could move out and let their brother quickly marry another wife. "Then I'll go back and discuss it with my brother before making a decision." "Sure, you can come over at any time," Zhou assured her before turning around and heading home. In the afternoon, Tian Jiaxing's family sent over the remaining furniture and an additional single bed, saying it was for Gu Qingrui to use as a patient bed. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. Before dinner, Gu Qingrui was about to lock the door and let the dog out when he saw the Tian siblings walking over. Gu Qingrui paused for a moment before warmly welcoming them into the house. On the other hand, Zhou heard the commotion outside and immediately glanced at the dishes on their dining table. There was braised tofu, pork ribs, fried cabbage, and rice. After confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary, she got up and went out to welcome them. "You guys are having dinner. Why don't we come back later?" Sister Tian looked at the food on the table and smiled awkwardly before getting ready to leave. Zhou quickly stopped her. "No, you came at the right time. Since you're here, let's eat together." No, we've already eaten before coming here. Besides, we also had pork ribs for dinner." Sister Tian shook her head and said. Yeah, you guys eat. Well, just sit at the side and wait. Tian Zhuang replied. Seeing this, Zhou went to the kitchen and brought back 2 pairs of bowls and chopsticks. She also gave each of them a small bowl of braised ribs and braised dried tofu. Do try the pork ribs and dried tofu that I made. This, well, don't mind if we do. Tian Zhuang smelled the rich meat fragrance and finally couldn't resist the temptation and took it. When Sister Tian saw this, she also accepted it. However, she only tasted a bite and gave most of it to Tian Zhuang. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui and Zhou immediately returned to their seats and quickly ate. After they finished eating, Tian Zhuang asked curiously, Sister Zhou, what is this red thing made of? It doesn't taste any different than meat. It's dried tofu. It's made of soybeans, but it's been pressed and stewed with spices. Zhou replied as she cleaned up the dishes. After saying that, she took the bowl and chopsticks and went to the kitchen. Chapter 57 Teaching the techniques. After she left, Gu Qingrui remembered that Zhou had previously mentioned that Sister Tian wanted to learn how to grow bean sprouts. He looked at the Tian siblings and said, Brother Tian, Sister Tian, you're here for the bean sprout, right? It's about bean sprouts, but not about growing them. I want to take some of your stock from you and sell it in the market. Tian Zhuang quickly replied. All these recipes were family secrets, and he didn't want to pry into them. How else would they get along in the future? Gu Qingrui was astounded for a moment. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you then. Our kitchen has limited space, and it's already difficult to provide the bean sprouts for Hongyun restaurant, so you should grow them yourself. How can I accept this? Tian Zhuang waved his hand and said. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. After all, growing bean sprouts can be figured out with a bit of thought. The first step is to pick out the beans that could germinate, soak them for 10 hours, then put them in a container with water leaking at the bottom and cover them with a wet cloth. After that, you just have to flush them with water every morning and night. You need to pay attention to the time when you soak the beans. 8 hours in spring and autumn is enough, and 10 hours minimum in winter. To put it bluntly, it is to ensure that the beans have enough water. Also, the water used every day must not be too cold, or the beans will freeze. Oh right, there's also the temperature. The room can't be too cold, or the bean sprout will grow very slowly. A leaking container? Sister Tian asked in surprise. Yes, like a broken pot, bucket, or even a woven basket. As long as the beans are always wet, it will be fine. Of course, good ones are fine too, but flushing the beans is a little troublesome. When Gu Qingrui said this, he saw the two looking thoughtful. He stood up and said, I'm sure you'll remember everything I said here. Let's go to the kitchen and take a look. It's time to water the bean sprouts. He brought the two to the kitchen and explained it to them after getting some water to demonstrate it to them. After they were done, he said, just like this. It's not difficult, just a bit of effort. Your stove fire has to stay on the whole day. Sister Tian asked. That's right. It can't be extinguished at all, especially at night. That's why we only open half of the air vent near our brick bed. This is also why we can't grow bean sprouts in large numbers. The siblings understood the workings and went home after sitting for another short while. On the other hand, at the Gu family's residence, after dinner, everyone was about to leave when Mrs. Lu suddenly said, I heard from Aunt Lu next door that Qingrui bought a donkey cart. Did any of you see it? Is it true?
Second Uncle Gu said, it seems to be true. I also heard Qingrui would push 2 urns to town every day after breakfast and bring them back when he returned. But, I don't know what they are doing. Do you know what they are doing? He asked Gu Qingxi. Gu Qingxi raised his head. Qingrui hasn't been going up the mountain much recently, so I don't really know. He thought, even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Since you've already chased them out, you shouldn't disturb them. It seems the couple has earned at least 20 taels of silver during this time. Otherwise, they could not afford to buy a donkey cart. Mrs. Yao said unhappily. That's enough. They've already split up, and it's a good thing that they can earn their living. You can think of more ways to earn money if you're jealous. Mrs. Chiao unhappily rolled her eyes at her. After saying this, she got up and returned to the east side of the house. Go and do what you should be doing. Father Gu got up and returned to his room after he finished speaking.
Chapter 58 Persuasion. When Mrs. Lute saw this, she immediately followed up and said excitedly, Darling, since Qingrui earns so much money, do you think we should go and ask them to pay their dues? Filial piety dues. Did you give them a house or land? Besides, I'm not old enough that I can't walk. Father Gu turned his head and replied in an unpleasant tone. He flicked his sleeves and went directly to one of his concubines, Mrs. Gua. What do you mean? They, Mrs. Lute said indignantly, but before she could finish her words, she saw Father Gu enter Mrs. Gua's room, and she was so angry that she snorted hot air. Mother, you should know better than me how Qingrui left the family. I think it's best if you don't have any ideas about Qingrui in the future. Otherwise, you will likely hit the hornet's nest instead of getting the honey you want, causing more trouble than it's worth. Besides, Qingrui knows medical skills. We might need him in the future, so it's better not to make things too ugly between us. The second son, Gu Qingye, walked in and continued, Otherwise, if father's affection for you is gone, our days here will be difficult. How could that be? Your father and I were childhood sweethearts. All these years, he has never left me. Mrs. Lute said indifferently. You, too, know that it's been so many years, but don't forget that no matter how deep a relationship is, it will fade. You've forgotten the once famous Mrs. Zhou. She was born an actress, deeply loved by father, and even you had to give in to her. But she was still left behind when we left the capital. Even though the existence of us siblings can protect your position, we can't protect father's feelings for you. Gu Qingye reminded her. That's impossible. Your father doesn't like Qingrui and his wife. Why would he fall out with me for them? Yes, he doesn't like Qingrui, but father loves his dignity, especially in front of the patriarch. Don't forget that he was the #1 person in the clan a few years ago and was the subject of others' flattery. His calls would always be heard, and he would always be in a glorious state of mind. But after coming back, he had to ask for the patriarch's help, especially for the 100 acres of land and the official job for me and big brother. When Qingrui was chased out, he didn't get any of the family's assets and lost even more face before the patriarch. Now that the patriarch and Shengru's relationship is getting closer and closer, do you think father will be happy about that? If you ask father to go over to demand Qingrui for money, not only will he lose face before Qingrui, but would father have any more dignity if the patriarch hears about it? Moreover, I've seen the family separation agreement. It clearly states that since Qingrui isn't getting any of the family assets, he's not responsible for father's retirement. However, they will pay for father's medical expenses according to the village's rules. Of course, what Gu Qingye didn't say was that it indicated that it didn't include Mrs. Lu. But he wasn't afraid of this. After all, the family property of the first household would all belong to Gu Qingye. If he couldn't afford to care for his mother, others would look down upon him. After Mrs. Lu heard it, her anger subsided a little, but she still said, He's also his son. Why shouldn't he take care of his parents? Gu Qingye saw that she was still not listening and immediately said impatiently, Although a concubine's son's share of the family property is small, he is supposed to get 30%. But when he split up with us, he only took 2 sets of clothes and an old quilt. Forget about him. I wouldn't have given any money either, if it were me. After Mrs. Lu heard it, she looked at him with a startled expression. Seeing his firm eyes, she didn't know what to say for a moment. Gu Qingye didn't want to say it like this. After all, everything his mother did was for him. After that, he helped her to sit down and said, "Mother, now that Qingrui has been separated, there's no one to fight with me for the family inheritance. So, you should return to your previous attitude toward the family. Otherwise, father might stay away from you." Chapter 59. Regretting their actions. After Mrs. Lu heard this, she turned her head and looked at him. Although she didn't say anything, she gradually calmed down and reflected on her life after returning. Since she was promoted to wife, their life as a couple seemed to have remained the same. Her husband had always respected her, but because of some disagreements, he reduced the time he stayed over at her place. She suddenly felt a sense of crisis, thinking of the relatively young Mrs. Gua. She hated that a younger one came and threatened her position after driving away the elder one. It seemed that she had to pay more attention to the things over there. As for Qingrui, it seemed she had to find a way to coexist. Otherwise, it would really look ugly if she continued this, and she and her sons would not be in a good position. The main issue was that her children were planning to find a partner, so she could not ruin their reputation. "Qingye, you're not young anymore. What kind of girl do you like? It'll help you arrange a marriage before the new year," she said. "Mother, here we go again. I don't want to look for a girl now. Let's wait until the situation at home has completely stabilized. Otherwise, I won't be able to find a good wife. You're half a year older than Qingrui, but he's all ready." "Mother, all right, I won't say any more. But you have to put in more effort too. Otherwise, finding a suitable partner will be difficult after you've missed the prime of your life. I know what I'm doing, but you can also go out and look for potential candidates in the nearby families, as marrying is a big matter that can't be taken lightly. At the very least, she must have good character, respect our parents, and have a good appearance." Yes, this is basic, or else she wouldn't be worthy of my son. Then have a good rest. I'll take my leave." Gu Qingye turned around and walked out after he finished speaking. After he left, Mrs. Lu looked at the empty house and suddenly felt a burst of loneliness. Her heart was filled with hatred toward Mrs. Gua. It seemed that she shouldn't mess around in the future. On the other hand, Mrs. Yao was washing second Uncle Gus' feet as she asked, "Darling, why do you think Qingrui goes to town every day? Does he really earn that much money? I didn't even ask. How would I know? However, I heard that Shengrui's medical skills were excellent. He was the one who treated Qian Jiaxing's broken leg, and he's now able to walk with a walking stick. What about ninth uncle's 13th son? Didn't he get hit by a wild boar? I heard that his intestines fell out, and I didn't expect Qingrui to be able to save him. I've also heard about that. Didn't they say that he couldn't leave his bed? Could he really survive? I heard this from the person who accompanied them in the past 2 days. Do you think they're bluffing? So in the future, we must soften our tone toward them and improve our relationship. We might need their help in the future. Now, Big Brother and Mrs. Lu are probably regretting their actions," Mrs. Yao said with a gloating expression. Second Uncle Gu looked at her intensely and said, "It's good that you know. I don't want to regret the same thing one day, so you're not allowed to deduct the expenses of the son, mother and son again." After hearing this, Mrs. Yao paused and said, with a dark face, "Did Mrs. Sun make up stories about me in front of you? Do you think I'm blind? I only have 2 sons, and I'll be counting on them to take care of me when I'm old. So, you'd better put away your little thoughts. Don't go too far. Hearing this, Mrs. Yao did not retort as she held back her anger and walked out with the tub of feet water. Just in time, she saw Mrs. Sun sneakily go out of the back door. After being stunned for a moment and making sure she didn't see wrongly, she put the tub of water aside and quietly followed. Chapter 60 Eavesdropping. When Mrs. Yao arrived at the outer courtyard, she saw Mrs. Sun enter Gu Cheng's room and quietly followed her. Just as she walked to the window, she heard Mrs. Sun ask, "Son, do you know what kind of business your third brother has been doing recently? Did my father ask you to come and ask?" Gu Qingxi raised his head and asked in surprise. "It is me who wanted to ask. Most of them have their own income, and we are the only ones who can't even earn a copper coin. I even have to depend on the madam's mood to get money for some needles and threads. These days are getting hard on us." Mrs. Sun sighed. She knew this wasn't a good move, but she had no other choice. In the past, she still had some monthly allowance for living. But her monthly salary had stopped since they came back here, but she still had to buy the daily necessities. If she didn't want to depend on Mrs. Yao's charity, she had to think of a way herself. Gu Qingxi did not immediately reply to her because he knew that Mrs. Sun was loyal to his father. If he told her now, his father would learn in 2 days. Once his father found out, the entire Gu family would know about it too. He would be ungrateful and would be harming his third brother if he exposed their secrets. On the other hand, Mrs. Yao could not hear the answer she wanted from Gu Qingxi and thought that he had deliberately lowered his voice. She immediately straightened her body and leaned toward the window. She didn't expect to meet a lizard, and it might have felt threatened as it immediately raised its head, ready to attack. Mrs. Yao was so frightened that she screamed and took several steps back. Although she quickly covered her mouth, the mother and son in the room still heard her. The mother and son looked at each other and rushed out, and they happened to see Mrs. Yao's back as she ran away in a sorry state. Mrs. Sun couldn't help but clench her fists. How despicable, actually eavesdropping on us. Gu Qingxi pulled her back into the house and said, "There really isn't any secret to speak of when we live in the same courtyard. As for the money, if you don't want to depend on Mrs. Yao's mood, you can ask father. You can ask her before father, too. If it really can't be done, when I learn some tricks from Brother Tian, I can catch prey and exchange them for money, and I will give them to you." He didn't say that he had recently learned to recognize some medicinal herbs from Qingrui and the others, but he didn't want to tell her. It was also to leave a way out for them in case anything happened. "You're still young, so you're not allowed to go up the mountain to hunt. As for money, your mother will think of a way, so you don't need to worry." Mrs. Sun's nose couldn't help but sting after hearing this as she turned around and left. After she had walked far away, Gu Qingye, who lived next door, walked out. He looked at Gu Cheng's room thoughtfully before finally retreating into his room. On the other hand, after Mrs. Yao returned to her room, second Uncle Gu was already snoring. She angrily pushed him before turning off the lights and lying down. However, she tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. She kept thinking of how Gu Qingrui and his wife were earning money, and her heart felt like it was on fire, burning her with anxiousness. The point was that she had enough of living a frugal life. Even if she couldn't go back to her previous life of luxury, at least she didn't have to be so conservative about her meals. However, when she thought of Gu Shengru's medical skills and her husband's instructions, she knew she could not go against the couple. Otherwise, if they fell out, they would be the ones to suffer. It seemed that she could only urge Mrs. Liu to do something. After all, Mrs. Liu's situation was direr than hers. Chapter 61 Conspiracy. The following day, after eating breakfast, Mrs. Yao put on the silver hairpin she had just bought a few days ago and went out to find Mrs. Liu, who was drying the blankets in the courtyard. She bobbed her head and said, "Sister-in-law, do you think my silver hairpin looks good?" Mrs. Lu glanced at it and said, "I was the one who picked it for you. Why are you still asking me that?" Then, she patted the blanket. "Look at my memory. How could I have forgotten about this?" Mrs. Yao said annoyedly, but it quickly turned into a face of showing off. After Mrs. Lu noticed something was wrong, she turned her head to look at her and just happened to see her showing off. Her face suddenly sank, but she no longer paid attention to her and pretended not to see it, busy with the work in her hands. She thought, isn't it just a silver hairpin? What's there to show off? In the past, it was something that I bestowed on my servants. But when she thought of the wooden hairpin on her head, she was really envious. However, she had to save money for her children's wedding, so she didn't dare squander it. She wanted to give Mrs. Yao a kick when she thought of this. When Mrs. Yao saw Mrs. Liu's dark face, she knew that Mrs. Liu's heart was unhappy and that she had poked at her sore spot. She was overjoyed. After all, their second family branch had finally suppressed the first branch. "Sister-in-law, do you really want to live your life like this?" Mrs. Yao asked. Mrs. Lu was stunned for a moment and turned her head to look at her vigilantly. "What do you want to do? What else can I do? We all know how much money our family earns every month. I'm afraid we don't even have enough money to buy food at the end of the month, let alone other things. If we want to live a good life, we have to find a way to earn more money. I remember that little sis-in-law likes to enjoy white mushroom soup, but you don't even have the money to enjoy it even once since we came back," Mrs. Yao said with a smile. After Mrs. Lu heard it, she finally understood what she meant. Mrs. Yao was goading her to find Gu Qingrui and his wife to find ways to earn money. However, she was not stupid. Through her son's analysis, she knew Gu Qingrui was no longer a stubborn donkey with no one to rely on. She couldn't do much. "From what you're saying, do you have a good idea? Doesn't Qingrui already have one? Qingrui is different now, and I don't want to make a joke of myself in the village. If you want to go, you can go by yourself. I'm not going." When Mrs. Yao heard this, she was shocked. Before, Mrs. Lu had almost taken the lives of the young couple. Why had she suddenly changed her tone now? Was it also because of Gu Shengru's medical skills? However, even if she changed now, the couple might not necessarily forgive what she had done in the past. Even though she looked down on Mrs. Lu, Mrs. Yao still had to make use of her. Otherwise, how would she get her cakes, beef, and mutton? Suddenly, the sound of a hen laying eggs could be heard. She immediately turned her head and looked at the next door unhappily. "I heard that sixth aunt would go to the haystack at the village entrance every day to make shoes and bask in the sun." After Mrs. Lu heard it, she paused for a moment. She quickly understood what Mrs. Yao meant, that they could ask someone else. "Do you know how to make shoes?" Mrs. Lu asked. "Who would?" Mrs. Yao understood the meaning of her words halfway through, and the two went to Mrs. Huang's room. Each of them found a shoe that had not been completed, took a needle and thread, and left. However, they didn't go there directly. Instead, they waited until sixth aunt had left and went to her house for confirmation. Only after that did they go to the village entrance after her. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.